This idea has been brewing in the back of my head for absolute ages, and I'm so excited that I put in all of these days of work finally to come up with this, and I'm passing it along to you so that you're able to just sit down, craft, and get some use out of your pattern paper. I have created a guide on how to use up an entire paper pack and create 34 different types of cards. It's so easy to follow along. I personally find that watching a video with 34 different card ideas to be a little overwhelming, not to mention quite long. So I've done you a favor and broken up these videos into 3 different parts to make it really manageable to watch. So each Monday, I'm going to be coming out with a different part for all 34 of these cards with 11 to 12 ideas in each one. If you're impatient and want all of the card ideas now, then just check the video link in the description and sign up for my newsletter, and you'll get the link straight away for the next 2 videos. Now, a quick mention when you're grabbing your patterned paper, I do recommend grabbing a pattern paper pack, because when you grab a whole pack of paper, a lot of the colors are going to coordinate. In fact, the whole pack probably does coordinate with each other. So the one I'm using today, for example, is full of beautiful pink, purple, blue florals and butterflies, and it has that black as a nice accent. So it's nice to grab a stack of papers that you know are going to work well together. If you have a pattern paper pack that has more or less pages, then you can choose the card sketches in these videos that you like and just adapt them for your paper pack. If you only have 12 by 12 paper, give it a cut in half from top to bottom and from side to side, and you've got yourself 4 sheets of pattern paper. Couldn't be any easier to adapt this to your stash. Okay, so let's get started with all of the card ideas. And we're gonna start off very simply. And I like to use some pre-cut, pre-scored card bases so I can get crafting really quickly and not have to cut and score these myself. So all the cards I'm using are 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. So I'm going to begin by grabbing some strips of this beautiful patterned paper, and I've grabbed a variety of them. And as I said, the paper pack that I'm using is double-sided, and it has 18 pieces in total. There's 6 designs, 3 of each design. So I can go ahead and choose from the back or the front side, whichever one I truly like. So I'm going to grab these strips and I'm going to flush them right against each other, but I am leaving a nice little white border on the sides. This is a personal preference of mine, but of course you can make them 4 1/4 inches across, and then you can cover up the whole card if you prefer. Okay, so that'll get you 2 different designs as well, obviously, but we'll get to that design later on. So I'm just grabbing my strips here, 6 of them in total, and I'm just putting them all on my card to create the first design. How easy is that? The next one is going to be even easier. I'm grabbing my card stock here, my pattern paper, and I'm cutting it down to create a beautiful card panel. Once again, leaving that white border on the edges of my card base. Now, I find with very busy pattern paper like this one, I need to tone it down a bit, but I don't want to take away from the integrity and the beauty of the paper itself. So one of my supplies that is a go-to is vellum. This creates sort of a frosted look over top. It'll tone down your background, and you can cut this the same size as your cardstock, or you can cut it down a little bit so only a certain area is really quite muted. So just adding a piece of vellum on top of your pattern paper and attaching it to a card base, it really can't be easier. So there you go, card number 2. A lot of the cards we're creating today just has to do with cutting down your pattern paper and glue, but we'll get into how you can use other supplies as well. The next card, again, just as easy. All of these strips that I'm using are the same width, but of course you can vary the width of them, which we'll do in further card designs. I'm just attaching them one on top of the other, and I'm just tilting them from right to left, keeping the middle one relatively neutral and straight. This is going to allow me to use lots of different pattern papers, a lot of scraps that might be left over, and it creates a nice little pattern of collage papers without it being overwhelmingly too much. Now I decided to take this card a little further, and I'm going to be mounting it on top of a piece of black cardstock. I figured it would make the colors pop. Anytime you add black to a vibrant color, it's going to make that color look even deeper and brighter. So this was a logical choice for me. So I went ahead and created this pattern. I used this pattern paper here. Now, if you really want to get the most out of your pattern paper, you can cut out a rectangle from the center of this, since you won't be seeing a lot of this pattern paper anyway. That kind of goes to waste. So don't forget that that's always an option for you. However, if you're like me and have an overwhelming amount of pattern paper, at least I used to have an overwhelming amount of pattern paper, this probably doesn't really bother you. I added a nice little black strip across the center, which will be a perfect area to add a sentiment in the future. Let's move on to our next card. Here I'm just taking 1x1 squares. This is really easy to do, and I'm just lining them up with attempting to keep some even spacing in between. I like to work in diagonal lines. That helps me the most, and once you get your first line down, then you're pretty much good to go. The cool thing about this one too is you actually don't need a ton of the 1x1 squares. You can easily, just when they start to flap off the sides of the edges, cut off those edges and use those to fill in any sort of those smaller gaps. You don't really actually need too many of the full 1x1 squares. I really like to do this because you can add a whole bunch of different pattern papers and it creates this beautiful quilt look that is really just timeless, and you can use up a lot of those little scraps that you might have left over from your pattern paper packs, which often don't get used. The important thing is when you go ahead and cut these down is that all of the pattern paper is secure on here. If you're using liquid glue, you've let them sit for a minute or two and dry, so that when you go ahead and you cut these down, none of the papers are shifting. So now I have all these papers that have been cut off, but again, you can use these to fill in any small gaps on the sides, which I'll do right now and show you. Or you can go ahead and use these and cut them into small pieces as confetti for shaker cards if you want to have absolutely no waste. I personally absolutely love this idea, and you can keep cutting down until you're content and the background is filled. I actually created 2 of these for today because you can get truly different looks depending on the pattern paper that you're using and depending where you lay down your first squares. Moving on to our next card here. This is one of my favorite things to do when cards are looking a little bit boring, I guess you could say. When you have a lot of white space, sometimes it can look a little dull, and my favorite way to fix this is to add some white embossing paste over the stencil. This isn't a super quick card because you have to give it some drying time. This embossing paste will need about 20 minutes to dry, but that will vary on climate and how thick you've added the paste onto your stencil. So I try to add it as evenly as possible, but as little of a layer as I possibly can. One way to get as little as possible is to go over, kind of like when you're painting, from top to bottom, and then just continue going in straight lines, and eventually you'll get a nice even look. When you're doing this, it's important when you're finished to remove the stencil before the drying process begins so that you can wash it and it doesn't get caked on. Sometimes when I know I'm going to be doing a lot of these, I'll add a soapy water in a Tupperware container next to my work spot so that I could just throw them in there until I can get them to a real sink. But this adds such gorgeous beauty, a beautiful texture onto the card, and will make your pattern paper stand out. The best part about this is I'm using on a glass mat, and a glass mat is so easy to clean up, and it helps me prevent waste of the paste because I can go in just kind of in one shot. Now, in order to help the pattern paper stand out, I've attached it to a piece of colored cardstock that I actually colored in with a marker because I didn't have purple cardstock, and attached it to my card to create this absolutely stunning card. One thing you might have noticed so far is you haven't seen a completed card with a sentiment with an embellishment. And the reason why is because I believe that if you see the finished cards, then you're going to have an idea in your head of what this card must be. This background has to go with birthdays, or this one has to be with this specific thank you die or stamp. And I don't want that. I want this guide to be a complete guide so that you can simply take your pattern paper, do the same sketches as me, and then finish them as you please. Now, if you're the type of person that needs to see those exact photos of completed cards, you need the exact measurements for every little detail that I'm showing, you want the card sketches and how to cut each pattern paper, then you're welcome to check out the link in the video description below for my VIP membership program. Justine Hovey VIP members this month are getting this included in their membership. It's $9 a month, you can cancel at any time, and you get access to all of my classes. So that is such an amazing deal. Plus, there's tons of exclusive videos in there and bonus live classes. If you don't want to belong to a membership program, I can understand that monthly expenses aren't exactly something everyone can budget for, so this is available on its own as a standalone product as well. My next card here is super fun to create. So this is a very clean and simple card once again. And I'm going to grab my card base here and I'm going to grab a card front that measures roughly the size of my card base. But I am going to cut it down a bit so I have a gap in the middle. These two pieces here I've actually mounted on some foam panels. So scrapbook.com has come out with some foam that is actually the size of card fronts, which is really awesome. So you don't have any sag or anything by adding things like 3D foam tape. And I'm just going to add that so I can add a pop of color in the center. I want that pop of color though to stand out. So I'm grabbing some black strips here and adding them to the sides of my panels in order to help this pattern paper here really shine. So all I need to do is just kind of slip it under here, and I always cut my pattern paper to be about 1/4 of an inch longer than I need it to be, just to adjust for any sort of gaps that might occur. Or if someone's looking at the card from the side that might see a little bit of white, that will deter from that happening. And then there you go. The card looks absolutely stunning. All I need to do is remove the double-sided piece of this foam sheet, and then it's all done. My next card is a variation on the first card that we created where we added various pattern paper strips going up the card. And you can add as few or as many strips as you like depending on the work you want to put in. You can make them 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, 1 inch, 1.5 inch, 2 inch. It's completely up to you. You're just going to have more or less pattern paper. But one thing I also like to do is add sort of an accent piece of cardstock. The 3 accent cardstocks I use the most are silver, gold, and holographic because they generally match any type of pattern paper that I might have in my stash. I'm also going to show you how I get even spacing without having to take out a ruler and a pencil and start measuring. So what I will usually do is I will glue down the very top and the very bottom of my cardstock. And that is going to allow me to just have an idea of how much spacing I have for the rest of the strips. Okay, so once I have this, then I can go ahead and grab a strip and add it to the very middle. Adding an odd amount of strips is going to help you a lot in this sense because you can put the middle and then all you need to do is adjust the two. And if you're using liquid glue, you're going to have time to shift it up and down a little bit, which means when I add glue to my pattern paper strip, I try to avoid the edges just a little bit so that I can push it up and down if I need be and not get glue on the holographic paper. This helps me get my spacing super evenly and it's quite helpful. Take a look at that shine and how much it brings out the pattern paper. Next card is a 2-for-1. So you can grab yourself any sort of cover plate die, or if you don't have something like this, you can grab alphabet dies, you can grab alphabet stickers, you can grab alphabet stamps. It's completely up to you, but it's going to be easier if it's something that can cut out. I'm going to attach a piece of pattern paper to my cover plate here, and this is going to give me 2 cards. I show this on my channel constantly because if I can get 2 cards out of the supplies I already have out on my desk, then that's just a bonus for me. So I've run this through my die cutting machine, and it's so important to keep every single piece that comes out of this die cut because it's going to allow you to have no waste, but it's also going to allow you to create the 2 cards. So I always start by using the frame. And the frame is going to allow me to place the letters evenly as it was intended by the die. So I grab my glue and I start just gluing along the edges of this frame. Being careful, of course, not to glue the frame itself because when you pull it off, you might get some ripped paper. So once I have glue added to each one of these letters, what I'm going to do is fill in each one of the letters that I have here, of course, avoiding those open spaces of the B, D, R, and A. And this is going to allow me to get the even spacing and be able to really quickly do the paper piecing. The second card, of course, can grab the frame, and then all you need to do is fill in the gaps of the R, B, D, and A if you want to. Some people like the look of not having these centerpieces, but that is not my style and not for me. So this is a great way to get 2-for-1 cards. And I'm going to show you a few different ones throughout the classes, or throughout the videos rather, that I'm doing over the next few weeks. My next card is one of my favorites for when I have a lot of those small strips left over of my patterned paper. The best part is you don't need exact measurements for this. You can have everything the same width, the same height, different heights, different widths. It really doesn't matter. I had all of these little strips left over, and I'm just going to start layering them onto my cardstock, and I'm not going to glue them down straight away so that I can adjust as I go if need be. I'm adding some of the shorter, thicker strips first, and then going in with some of the thinner, longer strips, going over top, and just kind of arranging things in a way that I see fit. Adding some behind, some in front, and trying to get it even of the two. Okay, so I'm gonna go as quick as I can here and just start layering these, and then they'll all be finished and ready to go. Something like a really big sentiment over top would work really well with a card like this, or adding a really simple stamp that is quite small for a sentiment in the bottom right-hand corner would also be perfect for a card like this. Depends whether or not you want the sentiment or the pattern paper to be the focus of the card. That's going to determine the size of your die or stamp for this and what you want to be the most important feature. And as I said, you always have these little pieces. You might not know what to do with them. Just throw them in a jar or throw them into a baggie with your pattern paper pack and make a card like this. Those are your first 11 ideas on how you can use up your patterned paper pack. If you'd like to check out more pattern paper ideas, you can check out this video here, and I'll see you next Monday for part 2.